Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mechanical Engineering Seminar Series. It's my really great pleasure to introduce the seminar speaker, Professor Harish Tipur from Auburn University today. I have known Harish really since the early 90s or even late 80s. This is because at that time I visited Caltech a lot. And at Caltech, I constantly heard the name of Harish Tipur. And he was the one who, together with a few other faculty members, including our faculty Schroeder, and also Eric Rosaki, they invented this method called CGS, Coherent Gradient Sensing. This method became very popular in experiments to do very powerful measurement. And after that, Harish went to join at Auburn University and became a prominent faculty member there. In fact, he received the University Teaching Award. He also received the University Research Award. He also plays a prominent role in the society. For example, he was the editor-in-chief of this journal, Experimental Mechanics. I know our own faculty, Horacio Espinosa, also was an editor for that journal. They really made the journal a prominent one. In addition, being editor, and he also received this research award from Society of Experimental Mechanics, also from International Congress on Computational and Engineering, Computational and Experimental Science. Many different awards. I think for that one, he received the Kobayashi Award. Today, he actually is going to talk about something different called DGS. The one he invented at Caltech was CGS, but today he's using the DGS method. So, well, Harish, the floor is yours. Go ahead. We look forward to your seminar.
Thank you, Greg. Let me start out by thanking Professor Huang for his very generous introduction. I must say that I have known Professor Huang also for a very long time. And since the days he was at Caltech, and I have followed his work very closely, and it is very wonderful to see that such eminent scholars are part of your department. I must also say that I'm a long-time associate of Horacio Espinosa, Professor Espinosa, and Professor Sridhar Krishnaswamy. Professor Krishnaswamy was a partner in crime back in the days of Caltech when we shared an office and worked on a method called coherent gradient sensing. At that time was a very popular method. Today I'm going to focus on a different variant of that approach, but to study cascading crack bifurcations in a rather difficult material to examine using full field optical methods. The material is soda lime glass. Even though it is a material that is found everywhere in engineering applications, we often don't have experimental methods, particularly optical methods, to investigate fracture and failure phenomena. So the focus of this talk is on quantification of fracture mechanics-based precursors in order to understand crack bifurcations in soda lime glass. The work is actually carried out by my current student, Siva Dondeti, and this is basically a work that is currently in progress, and we are learning more about our data on a daily basis. The outline of this talk is as follows. First, I'm going to tell you why we are interested in studying the soda lime glass and what are the challenges associated with it. I will also show you some classical experiments, including photoelasticity. You all have heard of photoelasticity, which is still a very powerful method even today. And we have tried other experimental methods, including digital image correlation, in order to study fracture of glass with very little success. Therefore, the focus was switched over to a technique called digital gradient sensing, or DGS methodology. Once I talk about the methods themselves, the focus will shift to our measurements, both for single crack bifurcation as well as cascading crack bifurcations in soda-lime glass plates. I will tell you some results, quantification of fracture parameters, how we go about doing that, and identify some precursors based on our measurements, try to connect that with the fractography of the fracture surface, and I will summarize this talk. I hope you can all see my cursor, because this cursor keeps disappearing on me. So if you don't see the cursor, please alert me, okay? Thank you. So the motivation for this talk is as follows. Soda-lime glass is one of the very widely used structural materials, transparent structural materials. It is used both in civilian as well as military structures. You can see this iconic structure in front of Louvre in Paris. And you can also see the glass cladding that is often used in skyscrapers. And another place where you may not have noticed is the transparent armor used in armored vehicles. Some of these armored vehicle windows are about a foot thick, 12 inches thick, so that ammunition is not going to come through. The shrapnel is going to be prevented from entering the vehicle itself and harm the personnel. Soda-lime glass is, it is over 80% of all manufactured glasses even today. So this is a huge amount of glass. And at one point I read somewhere that, you can lay a road all the way from Los Angeles to New York using glass. And that is the amount of glass that is manufactured just in the US on a yearly basis. It has excellent optical properties. It has very high stiffness, relatively high stiffness compared to other transparent materials, high compression strength, excellent fire and chemical resistance. More importantly, it is a low-cost material, and it is a sustainable material. It is also a material that is ideal to study brittle fracture, particularly crack branching phenomena. Until now, people had not been able to study this using optical techniques. And that's why they had relied on transparent polymers to study, which usually have a lot of viscous effects as well as non-homogeneity issues. The results need not have to match up very nicely with the brittle fracture that we often see in case of glass. The challenges. This is also an important thing for all of you to note why people were not able to study soda-lime glass all these years is because it is not only a stiff material, but it is also a highly brittle material. Failure strain is less than 0.1%, and fracture toughness is 0.5 megapascal root meter in case you're familiar with that literature. Tensile strength is rather low. At the low end, you can see that the tensile strength could be as low as 40-45 megapascals. And crack in this material often travels very fast, typically in the range of 1,000 to 2,000 meters per second. So a mile per second crack speed is very common in glass, particularly under dynamic conditions. And deformations are highly localized. So when you talk about a hairline crack, this is truly a hairline crack. Crack tip opening displacement is as small as 100 nanometers or less. Another challenge that we always come across with glass is it is highly, its elasto-optic properties are relatively weak. Stress optic constant and elasto-optic constant are both low, and I'm going to tell you what they are in a second. And the full field optical investigations, therefore, with glass have been prohibitively difficult. Here I'm showing at the bottom an experiment that we undertook a while ago where a projectile has impacted the edge of a plate. And you can see when the compression is dominant at the impact point, the photoelastic fringes form very nicely. On the other hand, when cracks begin to propagate, fringes disappear very quickly, and a propagating tensile crack usually does not have any fringes at all for us to analyze. So let me talk about the experimental details a little bit, the specimen and material details. Our specimens basically are planar geometries with a V-notch on one of the edges, and it has a crack that is extended into the material a little bit longer. All the experiments were done on quarter-inch thick samples. We have a couple of geometries, and I'll show you results for both the geometries. This is a 4-inch by 6-inch sample. And the material properties that are relevant to us are density of this material, 2,500 kg per meter cube, and the longitudinal and shear wave speeds are 5,700 and 3,400 meters per second. I want to highlight the stress optic as well as elasto-optic constants of this ordinary soda lime glass material. Stress optic constant is about an order different from that of homalite, which is a very popular polyester using which people have studied crack branching events in the past. Elasto-optic effect is at least 50 times lower when compared to, say, plexiglass. So these are the things that make studying glass extremely difficult, and people had given up on it for a long time and gone to study simply the problem using polymeric materials, despite all the problems that you face with polymer substrates. The specimen was loaded in our experiments using a 6 feet long bar. It's a long bar so that we can get a one-dimensional wave to travel and impact the specimen. We basically launch a striker, and it creates a stress wave that loads the specimen. Once the crack initiates from the inserted notch tip, it travels some distance and basically branches without any provocation on its own. So the region of interest that we have investigated in this experiment is about 3.5, 4 inches by about 3 inches. So it is a fairly large area if you were to consider the sensitivity of the method that I'm going to be showing you later on. The event duration is about 100 plus microseconds, during which the crack initiates, branches, and propagates all the way to the end of the region of interest. We can also measure contact stresses by adjusting the location of the region of interest. First, I will show you some photoelastic results so that you appreciate the difficulties that we faced. Here is an experimental setup with a gas gun. The gas gun basically launches a striker. The striker impacts this long bar, and that in turn loads the specimen. The specimen is kept as part of a circular polariscope, a standard circular polariscope. It has a pulse laser, which produces laser pulses about 115 nanoseconds long and repeats itself. And the event itself is captured in the form of fringes by a high-speed camera, which is a Kirana high-speed camera. The details of that high-speed camera are as follows here. It is a fixed resolution camera, 900 by 800 pixels approximately. It can run up to 5 million frames per second and can capture about 180 images at that resolution. All our experiments were done at 1 million frames per second. The striker velocity that we used was a relatively low impact velocity of 6 meters per second. And as I noted before, the illumination was pulse illumination 160 nanoseconds long. And we are measuring the principal stress differences using photoelasticity in the form of fringes. So I'm going to play you a little animation to show the whole event and get an idea of what's going on. So here is the end of the long bar, which is tapered and inserted into the notch itself. And you can see the contact stresses that have developed at the time instant 10 microseconds before the crack actually initiated. And when I run this animation, you see that the crack initiates and propagates to the middle of the field of view, and then branches without any provocation. So you can clearly see when it is in the middle, you have these tiny fringes that form at the tip of the, along the crack flanks, and they also travel along the crack faces. So let me show you a few still images from that experiment. The top left here is for the case when the crack was loaded but had not initiated. The top right here is when the crack is propagated as a mode 1 crack, and we call it a mother crack. And this mother crack eventually propagates in the bottom left corner here and branches in the middle of the field of view, approximately in the middle. And then this is at a much later stage. One of the points that I want to emphasize here is those tiny fringes that are traveling along the crack faces themselves. These are caused by the Rayleigh waves that are propagating along the crack faces that produce contact stresses along the, because it's a nano scale crack opening displacement. So these stitch marks are attributed to Rayleigh waves that you see, but these are not necessarily the crack tip fringes themselves. You can also measure the load history, force history that you have imposed on the specimen using a simple approximation based on Flamand solution. And you can back out the force history by analyzing all those fringes that you saw. Normal force as a function of time here. And you can see that the loading produces some sort of a trapezoidal type of loading. The first bar that you see, the grayscale, is for when the crack initiated, and the red is for the place or the time when the crack branched. So I'm going to not focus heavily on the contact stresses themselves, but focus more on the crack problem. Here, the crack length is plotted as a function of time, crack length history basically. And the gray bar that you see is the crack initiation place, and crack branching corresponds to the red bar that you see there. The solid dots represent the mother crack that is propagating as a mode 1 crack, and then once it branches, it becomes mixed mode crack. The fractured sample is shown on the right hand side. You can see that the crack propagated and then branched into 2 mixed mode cracks, and there is a post-impact damage that has occurred to the specimen later on, and also some crack path wiggling that you see when it reaches the edge of the specimen because of the instabilities caused by the reflected stress fields. You can measure crack velocities, and here is a plot of velocity as a function of time. And once again, the crack velocity jumps up. As I mentioned in the very early slide, this crack propagates very easily at 1,500 to 2,000 meters per second. And it reaches that speed within a matter of 2 or 3 microseconds. Then it is cruising along at this speed, and then it begins to slow down. The slowing down is a good indicator that something about to happen. So when the crack begins to slow down, at the end of that period, there is a crack branching event, and this branching event produces a sudden jump in the crack velocity, which again continues and settles down to this cruising speed of around 1,500 meters per second. So I want you to remember this signature, a constant velocity followed by a slowing down and a sudden jump in the crack velocity after branch. So this is going to be a pattern that I want you to recognize in future experiments that I'm going to talk about.
Harish, just a quick clarification question.
Sure.
The velocity after branching is the projected velocity?
It is along the crack length itself.
Oh, along the crack length.
Yes, yes. It is still 1,500 meters per second, not projected. Good question.
Okay, thank you.
The highlight that I'm making here is to emphasize the fact that the crack tip fringes are completely absent you only saw the fringes near the compression zones, whereas there is no fringe at all in the tensile or the growing crack in front of the growing crack. So as a result, the success of the photoelastic investigation was only partial because I don't have any information regarding the stress intensification that's happening in front of the crack itself. So we adapted different methods. One of the methods that I'm going to talk about today is a variation that Professor Huang mentioned in the beginning. This is a variation of CGS, but it is called digital gradient sensing. But the methodology is completely different, does not depend on interferometry at all. The experimental setup is shown here. The setup is same as the photoelastic setup. We launch a striker, and the striker impacts this long bar that loads the specimen. The setup basically consists of a planar surface which is placed behind. This is the top view of the setup. So there is a planar surface that is kept behind the specimen. And this specimen has random speckles sprayed on it. And we are photographing these speckles by your high-speed camera, which is running at 1 million frames per second. The details of the camera are exactly same as before. And what we are measuring by this experimental setup is the angular deflections of light rays. What we are measuring are two orthogonal angular deflections of light rays, phi x and phi y, which can be shown to be the gradients of stress as sigma x plus sigma y in the crack growth direction and normal to the crack growth direction. Okay, so I want you to keep in mind that what we are measuring by this modification of the setup is that we are measuring angular deflections of light rays by photographing random cells, speckles through our high-speed camera. Here is a little bit of the working principle of the method itself, this new methodology, which is now about 7-8 years old. You can go to this particular paper that I have referenced at the bottom to find more details about how the method works. Basically, it consists of a camera that is taking pictures of a random pattern that is placed behind a transparent specimen. These are random speckles that are on a plane that is different from the transparent specimen. If you spray paint your transparent specimen, it becomes your DIC. Therefore, here, when we have no load on the specimen, when you take a picture of the speckle pattern, a point P gets imaged through a point O on the specimen plane by a pixel of the camera. So when I load the specimen, there is going to be a state of stress everywhere in the specimen. And you have thickness changes as well as refractive index changes that occur. And as a result, if I were to take a picture of the speckle pattern, I'll be photographing a neighboring point of P, not the same point, a neighboring point of P. Now it is identified as Q by the same point on the specimen surface by the same pixel of the camera. So now I have two images, one in the deformed state and the other one is in the undeformed state. When I correlate the two, I get these pseudo speckle shifts. I take those pseudo speckle shifts and divide that by the gap that exists between my specimen plane and the target plane. By doing that, I can get angular sweeps, phi x and phi y, that you see in my shaded area. These are the angular sweeps along the XZ plane as well as along the YZ plane, two orthogonal planes. So those angular deflections of light rays can again be interpreted as stress gradients if I were to bring in the material constant C sigma, which is the elasto-optic constant, and B is the nominal thickness of the specimen itself. Let me show you a little movie of the animation that you can make out of these images. So when I run this movie, all you're looking at is the speckles that are on the target plane. So there is nothing very exciting that is going on as in the photoelasticity experiment, because all you're looking at are slightly distorted speckles. Only thing that you see are little blobs of distorted speckles that are traveling along the potential crack path. So there is not a whole lot that you will see by simply looking at the images themselves, but you can certainly go back for post-processing. When you do the post-processing, all you're doing is you're correlating the speckle image at each time step with the speckle image before the loading actually began. And you will be able to see contours of these angular deflections. These contours of angular deflections can also be animated. I'm plotting these as contours. These contours are 2.5 microradians increments. And in order to give you some idea of 1 microradian, you have the angle subtended by 1 millimeter at a distance of 1 kilometer. So that is as small as 1 microradian. So here, the left-hand animation basically tells you the evolution of the phi-x contours from the original crack tip, propagate for some distance, and then branch out into 2 crack tips. The crack tips themselves can be tracked by looking at those white dots that we have placed artificially on the contour pattern. So on the right-hand side, you see the contour patterns in the direction. The gradients are in the direction normal to the crack path itself. Here are some still images from that particular experiment. The edge of the specimen is highlighted, and the various dots that you see are those dots where the crack was in the previous instance of time. The top row corresponds to the mother crack. The bottom row corresponds to the crack that has already branched and has produced 2 daughter cracks. So we have 1 bifurcation event in this experiment. Of course, like in case of photoelasticity, you can also do contact stress analysis. You can use the same approximation of Flamand solution and back out your force history by simply measuring the resultant angular deflections of light rays. So this is the history that we were able to capture. Of course, this was a completely different experiment. The loading history was not necessarily all that symmetric as in the photoelasticity experiment, but nevertheless, you see the behavior of this trapezium-shaped loading history that is typical of these types of Kolsky-Bar experiments. The crack length history is plotted here. The mother crack is the solid symbol. The crack initiates at the gray line and branches at the red line here. Once the branching takes place, the 2 crack tips, there are 2 sets of symbols that are in the post-branching period. And the sample that has fractured and reassembled is shown on the right-hand side. Very nice symmetry. The crack propagates and nicely branches in the middle and produces a little kink as it approaches the pre-edge of the specimen. Crack velocities can be easily backed out from these measurements. Crack velocity once again jumps to about 1500 meters per second as in the photoelasticity experiment. Then it begins to slow down. As I mentioned previously, slowing down is a consistent indicator of the crack branching that is about to happen, and it branches. And then it reaches, 1700, 1800 meters per second, and then settles back into a lower velocity of 1500 again. So it doesn't drop all the way back because the crack has already approached the edge of the specimen, and it cannot branch at a velocity that is as high as 1500 meters per second. So observation is that it has to slow down for it to branch. I will explain why that is the case later on when we talk about fractography. So in this case, as you saw, we were able to actually capture the crack tip fields. So we are able to actually measure the stress intensity factors at the tip of a growing crack. We did that using the 2 measurements, phi-x and phi-y. We converted into angular deflections in local coordinates. X prime is the crack growth direction, and y prime is normal to the crack growth direction. X and y are your global coordinates. Alpha is the angle between the local and the global coordinate here. And phi-x prime is related to the gradient of sigma x plus sigma y in the x prime direction. In the symptotic expression that you see on the right-hand side, F and G represent your crack velocities, And A1 and D1 are the leading terms of our asymptotic expression that can be obtained as the two stress intensity factors. So A1 and D1 are connected to the two stress intensity factors. You can also obtain the higher order terms by including as many number of terms as you want. In this case, the T stress term, A2 is absent and D2 is 0. And one of the higher order terms, one pair of higher order terms we have been able to extract in these experiments that I'm not going to talk about very much in this talk is A3 and D3. So other parameters such as R and theta, the contracted polar coordinates are shown down here, and the explicit expressions for F and G are something that you can find in any standard dynamic fracture mechanics book. So here are the stress intensity factor histories that we were not able to measure in photoelasticity. So the mother crack basically increases, the stress intensity factor for the mother crack before initiation increases, and then it initiates somewhere around 0.7 megapascal root meter. This is a notch. This is a notch, and that's where the initiation took place. Again, the gray bar associated with the crack initiation, and the red bar where the branching took place. Due to initiation at the notch, the crack basically unloads a little bit, and then begins to ramp up again, and builds up all the way to approximately twice the value of this low stress intensity factor. The value of around 0.55, 0.6 increases to about 1.1, 1.2 megapascal root meter, and then branches. When it branches, once again, it drops down to the same value, approximately same value, where it was at the low point in case of the mother crack, and they continue to increase. The values continue to increase. The solid symbols, the upright triangle is for the upper branch, inverted triangles is for the lower branch. The open symbols that you see, the other set in this chart, the open symbols are always for the mode 2 stress intensity factors. And they are negligibly small for the mother crack. And then once you have the mixed mode branches form, the two daughter cracks form, you have some constant value of K2 towards the end of the fracture event that we were able to capture. Also, I want to point out that the values of K1 never increased to a high value of around 1.1, 1.2 megapascal root meter. I'm throwing a bunch of numbers here because these numbers are the ones that make sense in terms of the consistency and the precursors that I'm going to talk about down the line. The effective stress intensity factors were created by using both the mode 1 and mode 2 stress intensity factors. And these trends look very similar to that of K1 because that is the dominant contributor in this particular geometry and in this particular experiment. And as I noted before, the effective stress intensity factor increases monotonically prior to branching, and it reaches a value of approximately 2 times its value at initiation. I call this one the initiation because that's where the unloading has ended and it is beginning to increase. Once the branching takes place, you see that these values are also increasing, but they never reach a value sufficient for it to branch again. So we came to a conclusion that, maybe we should increase the dimensions of the specimen so that the crack runs and produces subsequent branches or cascading crack branch formations. So before I show you those results, I want to also bring up the fact that we tried, we have a whole bunch of measurements, including the higher order terms. We started throwing these things into groups in order to see what sticks. So what we have, what I'm going to share with you today in this seminar is that when you combine the effective stress intensity factor and the measured crack velocity in this manner, multiplied with the longitudinal wave speed of the glass and the square root of W being this width of the specimen, you get a quantity which I call sigma hat here. I call it activation stress for the lack of better explanation at this stage. And it has units of megapascals, or units of stress. So what we observed by plotting the history of this activation stress, sigma hat, is that the branching occurred at a value somewhere around 17 to 19 megapascals. And then once the branching took place, the activation stress never reached a value high enough for it to branch again. So this was a hypothesis, and we tried to test this hypothesis with other experiments. So I'm going to change the geometry on you at this stage and say I'm going to change the geometry by making the specimen wider. So the specimen here is 6 inches by 6 inch specimen instead of the 4 inch by 6. And the experimental setup is similar. We launch a striker, we load the specimen, and then we create the crack propagation. And then that branches and produces a second set of bifurcations. And as a result of our limited ability to capture the region of interest, the limited region in this case, we wanted to keep the region of interest the same without modifying things a lot. So we moved the region of interest a little bit into the specimen itself. So the event duration is same, region of interest is same. However, we are able to see the details associated with not only the first bifurcation, but another pair of bifurcation, which happened at the end of your region of interest. Here is the slide showing the branched cracks themselves. You saw a lot of details associated with the image on the left-hand side. The cascading crack bifurcations are shown on the right-hand side. As you see, the original notch tip is here. The region of interest is highlighted by that red line. The mother crack propagated, branched and produced 2 daughter cracks, and then 4 granddaughter cracks eventually. I have also noted some angles over here, although I have no clear explanation as to how to address them due to our limited experimental detail available to us in terms of the lack of T-stress at this stage. Here is a little animation of our Phi-X contours. As I noted, you will see a little bit of mother crack growth, then it produces bifurcated daughter cracks, and then granddaughter cracks also. This is Phi-X contours. These contours are once again 2.5 microradian per contour. So you can see the dots represent your current crack tip position. The crack initially propagates and then branches. And then basically at the end of the event, you're seeing 4 different sets of these Phi-X contours propagating from 4 different crack tips, all occurring simultaneously. Here are some still images from that experiment. The first column here represents Phi-X and Phi-Y contours for the mother crack, and the middle column for the daughter cracks. Once again, you see the one on the top is your Phi-X contours, gradients in the horizontal direction. And the bottom row represents contours corresponding to the vertical direction. The last image, last column here, are for 4 granddaughter cracks, where you have the crack tip field surrounding each one of them. I like to plot these things in the form of contours because I came from interferometry, but in reality, this is information that is available everywhere in the field at the center of each subimage. You can plot the crack velocity histories, just like the way we did it in the previous experiments. The apparent crack velocity for the mother crack, it's already showing a slowing trend as it enters the region of interest. Notice that there is no gray line here where the crack had actually initiated originally in our earlier experiment. So we are missing the crack initiation, but we are only looking at mother crack propagation. Once the crack propagates some distance, while it is slowing down, it branches, produces two daughter cracks. And you can see those daughter cracks are marked by the downward and upright triangles. These symbols beginning to show a cruising velocity of about 1500 meters per second. And this 1500 meters per second, once again, begins to drop off when it is getting ready to branch again. Notice that each of these daughter cracks branched once more. So as a result, you see the two blue lines. These two blue lines in an ideal experiment should be coinciding on top of each other. In this case, the upper crack branched a little bit earlier than the lower crack, and those are about 2 to 3 microseconds apart from each other. And once the branching took place, the four daughter cracks branched, there are four different sets of symbols over here, shown by these diamonds. And they all settle down to the 1500 meters per second here. So once again, as I had noted multiple times, slowing down of the crack is a clear indicator that the crack is about to branch. These are macro scale velocity measurements. And that happens in each of these three branching events that we have seen in this larger specimen. So in the last part over here, the velocity never decreased from 1500 meters per second. And obviously we did not see any branching, or consistently we did not see any branching as we had seen before. We also have extracted stress intensity factors without any details here. The effective stress intensity factor, the vectorial sum of your K1 and K2, here reached a value of somewhere around 1.3, 1.2 to 1.3 megapascal root meter, and then which is similar to the previous smaller specimen, where I had a value here somewhere around 1.1 to 1.15. And once the branching took place, the value once again dropped to a low value of 0.6, same value as in the smaller specimen. And this value again built up all the way to 1.2, 1.3 megapascal root meter and branched again. Once the branching took place, none of the granddaughter cracks show a value that is large enough. So I want to highlight that issue and say mother and daughter cracks branched at 2 times the effective stress intensity factor at initiation. This is my initiation corresponding to that mother crack. And in the later stages, it never exceeded, it reached the value, threshold value for the branching to occur. This activation stress that I pointed out in the previous geometry was again plotted. And you see that that value again reaches a number somewhere between 17, in this case slightly higher than 19 megapascals. But the two daughter cracks branched at a value which is approximately in the 17 to 19 megapascal range. So we still believe that this parameter may have some value in the long run in understanding the fracture behavior itself. So when I look at the 4 granddaughter cracks, none of these reached a high enough value of this 17 to 19 megapascals. Remember, the low value of tensile stress for this material is somewhere around 45 that is reported in the literature. So this value, this activation stress, in my opinion, is significantly lower for all these 4 granddaughter cracks, and we are not seeing any branching by that consistent observation that we have made relative to the previous experiments. So here is one experiment. We have done this experiment several times, and I want to show you one where things were not very symmetric, and see if the same idea holds good or not. So this was a repeatability experiment where we had, you can look at the right-hand side here, the crack has propagated, but the very initiation ended up being a mixed mode crack instead of being a mode 1 crack. These are the difficulties of an experimentalist. And we produced a mixed mode crack, which eventually became a mode 1 crack, and then 2 daughter cracks and 4 granddaughter cracks. So even in this case, when you plotted the crack velocity histories, we see that the mother crack was still propagating around 1500 meters per second, slowed down, and jumped to a very high value of 1800 to 2000 meters per second, settled down to again 1500 meters per second, slowed down again, branched, and then produced four granddaughter crack, four cascading crack branch formations. And that again settled down to another 1500 meters per second without further branching event. So no branching took place beyond the second set of branches. The effective stress intensity factor similarly at the first branching event. Notice that in this case, I have the gray line also. So we were able to capture the crack initiation in this case, as well as branching, as well as cascading branch formations later on. So this was an experiment that was more successful in some respects. So here you have the stress intensity factor increased to about 1.2 megapascal root meter or slightly higher, and then branched. And then from this low value over here, it again branched at around 1.2 megapascal root meter. And the granddaughter cracks did not reach a high threshold value for the branching to observe. Here is that activation stress, or the sigma hat parameter that I was talking about. And the branches, here you have two sets of branches, but both the branches took place at the same time instant. And the first branching event, which is the red line and the blue line, is the second set of branches. In each case, the sigma hat value is somewhere in the range that I'm talking about, 17 to 19 megapascals. So at this stage, I'm going to switch over to fractography. Before I talk about fractography, the emphasis is the precursors that we have identified in this talk at least, are three precursors. One of them is slowing down of the crack velocity before branching, and then the crack propagation from 1500 to 1000 meters per second is the drop in the crack velocity. And the doubling of the effective stress intensity factor by a factor of 2, and the sigma hat value somewhere in the range of 17 to 19 megapascals. So here is a fractographic image from a digital microscope. This digital microscope is a Kayens microscope. Some of you may have worked on this. Here I'm showing the surface of the fractured glass from a single bifurcation experiment. The lower part here, the crack is propagating from bottom to top. The lower part here is your mirror region. And typically in the fracture mechanics literature, dynamic fracture mechanics literature, you come across this mirror, mist, and Haeckel regions as the demarcations when what is the phase of the growing crack. Mirror region is immediately after the crack initiates from the notch itself, and mist region is a preamble to the Haeckel region. Haeckel region where you see chunks of materials being pulled out of the monolithic specimen itself. The experiment, the fractograph here is about 8.5 millimeters long. Unfortunately, the resolution of this digital microscope was not good enough for us to extract the roughness in the mirror and the mist region very accurately. Of course, we could get information in the Haeckel region, which is reasonably valuable. Therefore, we switched over to another microscope, which is a nanoscale resolution microscope. This is again a digital microscope. Each of these images that you are seeing is approximately 0.5 millimeter by 0.5 millimeter, and the color scheme that you see are different for different images. What I want to emphasize is the top two images correspond to your mirror region, where there were no features at all in the Kayens microscope. But here you can actually see the Wallner lines. Wallner lines are the stress waves that interfere when they reflect off of the free surfaces of the specimen and create these periodic structures. And the bottom here, the lower left corner, represents your mist region, where it is a preamble to the Haeckel region, where big chunks of material are being pulled out from the material itself, from the substrate. We are able to measure the surface roughness for each of these stages. One thing that I want to point out before I go to the roughness itself is the conic marks that are often reported to be part of the fracture surfaces in polymer literature are completely absent in all of our measurements. So I think this is simply an artifact of what we normally see in polymers, which could be the inhomogeneities, or it could be the viscous effects that are dominant in polymers. So we don't see any of that in soda-lime glass. Roughness was plotted, based on the existing polymer literature. I again plotted roughness as a function of crack length in this case, and then and velocity, crack velocity. When you look at the fracture surface roughness as a function of crack length, you see that in the mirror region, these are the low values here. This is where the crack initiated. The gray line here represents your notch initiated, and then there is some roughness, and then it settles down to a nanoscale surface roughness, which is where the mirror region is. And the mist region is somewhere over here. In the mist region, the surface roughness is still below 1 micron, about half a micron. And then this value very rapidly increases to about 4 or 5 microns when the branching takes place, indicated by this red line. We plotted roughness as a function of velocity because this will give you a significant advantage in terms of simply measuring the velocity and making some post-mortem measurements in order to identify what caused the branch. So here, we did not see any obvious trend. So this again departs from the polymer material literature, where glass fracture, particularly dynamic fracture, does not correlate with what is reported in polymer literature. So we tried to plot roughness as a function of the effective stress intensity factor. Lo and behold, we seem to have some kind of a power law type of behavior. To confirm that, we plotted that roughness as a function of log of that quantity as a function of your effective stress intensity factor, as well as this sigma hat, or the activation stress that I was talking about. And both of them seem to show some sort of a linear response, and this is where we want to go and explore this a little bit further in our future experiments. So with that, I'm going to summarize this talk by saying that this new technique, digital gradient sensing technique, has overcome the severe challenges associated with the mapping of fracture in soda-lime glass, particularly dynamic fracture. A drop in the crack velocity from about 1500 meters per second to 1000 meters per second is a consistent marker of imminent branching event in all the geometries that we have studied so far. Crack bifurcates when effective stress intensity factor is approximately twice the value at initiation, and the sigma hat reaching a consistent value 17 to 19 megapascals. And mirror mist Haeckel regions are seen, but we don't see any conic marks. And one place that we still need to explore is how do we go about evaluating the T-stress in order to explain our phenomenon a little bit more better, particularly in terms of the crack branching angles, etc. So with that, I'm going to stop and take any questions that you may have.